All right, we're jumping back into a How I Lead episode. This one's quite unique. This is a calling that never have I ever done an episode about this. It's the Area Medical Missionary Advisor. I don't know if that's like the exact technical term, but I interviewed Bryan Murray, who went to the New England area, Boston, Massachusetts, and spent some time, he's a medical doctor, right? Spent some time with a variety of missions, helping them with, giving his medical advice for the area for missionaries and medical needs, right? I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over. But yeah, and so I sat down and talked with Bryan, and just so interesting to hear the dynamics happening behind the scenes, things that go into account for, the health of missionaries, their mental health, whether they should stay or go home, and the thoughts and process goes into that, how the mission president is involved, and just really inspiring to hear about these different missionary opportunities. And so, this is definitely available for those out there with a medical background. There's a variety of opportunities to serve in the church, on a full-time mission, help medically, but really for anybody. Bryan talks about just that, the blessing it was to, just jump in and serve and use your talents to bless the church in whatever way that they can benefit from it. So, and I should also mention that Bryan has also started a podcast in his ward, inspired by the post that I did a while back. We'll link to it, called "Why Every Ward Needs a Podcast." And he's been having a great time with his wife, recording living histories in their ward as they get to know each other and their background and their faith development. And so hopefully that'll inspire you a little bit there. So let's jump into it. Here's my interview with Bryan Murray. Today I get the opportunity to chat with Bryan Murray. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, and you're in Washington State, is that right?
Yeah, Anacortes, Washington. That's right.
Very good. And you just returned, I guess a few months ago. It's been about 6 months since you returned from your mission. Maybe tell us what the mission was about, where it was, all the details.
Yeah, so we were serving in the Boston, Massachusetts mission, and we returned about 6 months ago. I was assigned, my primary assignment was as Area Medical Advisor to the Northeast area. So we had responsibility from a medical standpoint for 6 missions in that area: the Toronto mission, the Montreal mission, the Manchester, New Hampshire mission, the Boston mission, Syracuse, New York mission, and the New York City mission.
Wow. So lots of travel then, I would imagine.
Yeah. So we did travel. Most of our meetings were on Zoom, but we did feel, the need to make that connection personally with the people we were meeting with. So we would meet with mission leaders and the mission health advisor, which is usually like a nurse, and the family services therapist. We meet with them monthly with the Mission Health Council. And we found that it was best if we could establish those personal relationships with those people, so that they would it would make those meetings go better. I think you kind of got a level of trust when you can meet them personally. So we would travel around initially to all the different missions and meet them, and then whenever a new person came, like a new nurse came or a new mission president came, we would go out and visit them again. So about every 6 months or so, we would go and visit the different missions.
Wow. And what's your medical training?
So my specialty is internal medicine, which is adult primary care, and most of my career I worked in the hospital as a hospitalist.
Oh wow, interesting. So what's the story leading up to you deciding to go on a mission and getting the call and all that?
So my wife and I have always wanted to serve a mission. We've kind of been talking about it since we got married. It's just something we wanted to do. I had served a mission as a young man in Japan, in Sendai. My wife, Kristine, did not serve a mission when she was younger, but we always wanted to serve together. So it's kind of a goal. And as we kind of got near to my retirement, we had the opportunity to not work anymore. And so we said, okay, let's do it. Let's go on the mission. And, I did not want to serve a medical mission. I was reluctant, let's say, to serve a medical mission.
Right.
Whole life, and I just I didn't necessarily want to do that. And so initially that was our stipulation is we'll do anything, but we don't want to do a medical mission. And then for some reason I started thinking about it, and as I pondered, I thought, this is my talent, this is my gift, and not everybody can serve as a medical advisor. So I said, okay, I'll do this. If they need me, I'll do it. So I kind of feel like a level of consecration that, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna volunteer. So that's what we did. And it was interesting. We weren't sure quite how to go about this, because it's not like you just go on the website and say, I want to go on a medical mission. We had to kind of find the right people to talk to. So I called Salt Lake and talked to somebody, and they referred me to somebody. And so pretty soon I got on the phone with Weatherford Clayton's secretary. At the time, Elder Clayton was the 70 over the missionary medical department, and he's the one that ultimately kind of interviews you. So we had a Zoom interview with him, and he explained what the assignment would be, and then they have a list of places where you can serve, and so you can kind of pick out of those places, depending on what time of year you want to go, when you want to go, can pick where you want to serve.
Wow. So did you lean towards Boston? Is that the place that looked the best on the list?
So, well, there were several South American opportunities, but neither of us speak Spanish, so that really wasn't going to work for us. So we had at the time we wanted to serve, we had the choice of Orlando, Boston, Oakland, and also Mongolia. And for some reason, he kind of discouraged us from going to Mongolia. He said, that's really cold. You don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. And my wife grew up in Connecticut, so she chose to go to Boston.
Nice. So, my parents served in Mongolia, and they can confirm it is extremely cold. So
what did they do there? What was their assignment?
They were over the Perpetual Education Fund processes there. So yeah, but they had a great time, even in spite of the cold. So, maybe help us understand. I mean, mission medical, kind of, most of us who've served missions, people get sick or really sick or get hurt, or, I mean, how would you describe just the type of cases you're dealing with? And obviously, if they get to some extent or they cross some line, then it's like, hey, we need to send you home or take a brief period away from the mission until you get healed up. So, I mean, how would you articulate what's happening in mission medical?
Yeah, so it's really a very complex system, and it's very robust, and a lot goes on behind the scenes, of course. So each mission usually will have a mission health advisor, which is usually a nurse. Sometimes a doctor will fill that role, and their role is to work daily with the mission president. They field the phone calls from the missionaries that have everyday sicknesses, and they help them make sure they get the care that they need. Now that's in the North America. In most other countries, like in South America and Africa or wherever, the missions don't usually have a mission health advisor, and often the mission president's wife or somebody else in the mission is kind of just given that role as the quote mission nurse, and they field those phone calls from the missionaries and do the best they can. So we're really fortunate in the United States to have really good healthcare personnel who have dedicated this time to serve as medical missionaries. In my time as the area medical advisor, two of our missions were actually their mission health advisors were actually physicians, so they were MDs. So that's even a better thing. So they take care of the everyday things, and they kind of triage. Okay, who needs to go see the urgent care? Who needs to go see the emergency room? And if they have questions on the level of care that the missionary needs to have, then they'll call me as the area medical advisor. So I kind of advise them on how to make sure the missionary gets the best care possible. When a missionary gets sick or gets a diagnosis that's very significant, then I become more involved, depending on what the case may be. If it's a severe injury, they get in the hospital. We try to keep in contact with the providers there, and we kind of are a resource to the mission president to make sure that they understand the severity of the illness, because they're the ones that are going to make that decision whether or not the missionary needs to go home to recover or what. Um, there's also just a huge amount of resources in Salt Lake. We have a long list of medical professionals who are actively practicing medicine that volunteer to take my calls. So if I had a question on a case, and I had several, I would just get the list out and say, okay, I need a neurosurgeon. So who can I call? And I would call them up, and I would say, this is the case. What do you think? And it was so nice. They would drop what they were doing during the day, and they would talk to me. I felt really special that they would do that. And the other thing is that they were very well connected. We had a case of a very severe injury in Boston, and I was talking to the neurosurgeon in Salt Lake and in consulting, and he said, well, who's this neurosurgeon in Boston? I told him who it was, and he said, oh, I trained with him, and he had a connection with him already. So that was just nice. We have that kind of resources available.
Yeah. We always talk about, Dr. Nelson is the world-renowned surgeon that he was, but to realize that there's many Dr. Nelsons that are actively practicing, right, that are very well-respected surgeons or doctors, and to know that these networks exist, and that that the church comes together and leans on each other for their expertise, that's really inspiring.
Yeah, it is. And it's very comforting. And, missionary moms need to know that their sons and daughters are being well taken care of out there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And then was there a lot that were there instances where missionaries maybe were dealing with something medically, but they were able to stay on the mission, but they just had to alter their assignment or the way they served?
Yes. And so, some missionaries, would spend, maybe a short amount of time in the hospital for an acute appendicitis, for example. We have a few of those. They would convalesce. And the general rule is if they can be back to normal missionary activities within 2 weeks, then they'll usually keep them in the field. If it's going to take longer than 2 weeks, then they usually will need to go home. But those calls are made by the mission president. He weighs in all factors of how the missionaries serving, what their home life is like, and all different factors. And I really came to respect that they hold the keys. My job is to advise them, and what happens after that is really up to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you work a lot with mental health as well, or were there other practitioners that dealt with the mental health stuff?
So, yes and no. So, we dealt with mental health because it's the predominant problem that the mission health council deals with. So, but each mission in North America has a full-time family services therapist that sees missionaries, and sometimes that's all they do is see missionaries. So when we would have our health councils, once a month, probably about 75% of the missionaries we talk about were missionaries that were seeing a therapist for one reason or another. And so most of the time, a missionary comes out and they're just not accustomed to the new missionary life. And so the first step is that they struggle, and so the missionary will be advised to review adjusting to missionary life, which is something that they receive in the MTC. And most of them don't read it, but once they start reading it, a lot of them that will be helpful for them. And if that's not helpful, and they still struggle with anxiety or other issues, then the mission president will okay some visits with the therapist. And usually they'll visit 2 or 3 times, and that'll really help them and get them on track. And then there are some missionaries who really have some, pathologic, clinical problems that need ongoing treatment, and they get that as far as they can do that in the field. But there are some that need to go home.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would make your recommendations to the mission president, and then you'd find out later if that the missionary stayed or went or whatever. Were you ever in the details? Because I'm just thinking as far as like the parents are suddenly heartbroken that, oh, he's all right, just have him walk it off, or, maybe have him, just put him on a cot for 6 weeks, and then you don't need to send him home. Did you ever get into those dynamics, and what could we learn from that?
Yeah. So thankfully the mission president would deal with those dynamics. The missionary families The one tool that we have that was used quite effectively was the service mission. So some missionaries just weren't healthy enough, either physically or emotionally, to serve a proselyting mission, and so they were then offered, okay, you probably need to go home to get treatment, but while you're home, you can serve as a service missionary. And so that often was used very successfully in keeping the missionary engaged and making them feel like they were successful. They gave their offering, it was accepted, but there are other ways for them to do the work besides being a proselyting missionary. So
Yeah.
I think service missions, it kind of depends on where you're at in the United States, whether or not it's going to work at home. It does require some infrastructure at home with that service mission, and some areas are more prepared than others, I think. But it's certainly a good opportunity for young men, young women.
Yeah. Yeah. Any perspective you could share as far as for church leaders, bishops, stake presidents who are working with a missionary, and different health concerns come up during that, the paperwork process. Maybe you were surprised that some missionaries actually made it out there, or when they had this or that condition. I mean, any perspective you could share there?
Yes. So the first advice is be honest. So we laugh at it, but a bishop's good in heart, thinking, oh, well, we got to get Johnny out there to serve his mission, and they may skew the actual health issues. Okay, that happens, unfortunately. That they're not fully honest, and it's not just the missionary that's doing it. They're being complicit with sometimes church leaders. And that, I think, happens more internationally than in the U.S., but we had it too in the U.S. You just wonder how they got past the screening process. There's quite a rigorous screening process. Applications are screened by nurses and doctors, and so if you're honest with the process, they're going to pick it up, and you'll be offered, if it's an emotional or a psychological issue, you'll be offered counseling with a therapist before you even go out. And so usually they know what's up. And then, as far as preparing missionaries, to be emotionally reliant, self-reliant, the missionaries who spend some time away from home prior to going out, like going to school or doing some kind of a trip away from home, being independent, that really is very helpful. Missionaries who have a job, that, other than working for mom and dad, that actually have a job they have to be accountable for, that helps prepare them for missionary life. Mission presidents, especially like the farm boys from Idaho, they know how to work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So how would you describe your wife's responsibilities during your time there?
So we had the assignment as the area medical advisor. That was our area assignment. So we would report to mostly report back to missionary medical, but we were under the direction of the area presidency. But we also had a mission assignment. So in the Boston mission, we were assigned a YSA branch. And so we were very involved with nurturing those young adults. So we, as a couple, we taught institute classes once a week. We played the piano and directed the music on Sundays. That was quite a stretch for us, but we did the best we could. We attended their activities. So we were quite involved with other things other than medical. But to keep my wife involved with the medical, during the meetings, I would ask her to take notes. And so she's a very good secretary typist. And so she would come up with just great outline of notes of what was talked about during the meeting. And so I would use that to make sure that, things we talked about got done, and then follow up on my reports to Salt Lake. If, this is who we talked about and this is what's going on. And I would refer back to those notes. So it was very valuable that she was just always with me there side by side in the meeting. So even though I would, take the consult calls by myself, otherwise she was always involved with me. And during the Mission Health Council, even though she wasn't a doctor, she would often just offer her advice as a mother of 6 kids. She had some advice, so she would offer that to mission presidents. It was often very timely, so it was good.
Awesome. That's great. So with hindsight, are you glad you went the mission medical route? I mean, or I mean, would you encourage others, with medical backgrounds to do the same?
Well, I would definitely encourage others to do the same. I think that I really enjoyed the mission, but not just because of the medical. I think that looking back at the mission, really the highlights of the mission were the interactions with the YSA and getting involved in their lives and helping them, to advance along the covenant path. Those, I think, and those relationships are the ones that I can remember the most. But having said that, I also know that I performed a service that was important that I'm sure missionaries and missionary parents and families were grateful for. So even though I may not remember all the medical stuff I did, I realized that it was an important part of what I was doing. And I accept that, even though it wasn't necessarily fun. It was an important part of being a missionary, and it needed to be done. Someone needed to do it, and I was willing to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think back to my mission, and yeah, a lot of it was not fun, but with hindsight, I'm glad I did it. There's those tough days, or you're just going through the motions someday, or man, one more door to knock on, really, or it's like, but we do these things, and then you see the lives that change, the relationships that are made. It's a wonderful thing. So, very cool. Anything else? Any other point, principle, concept, just from that mission medical experience that we need to make sure we hit on?
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers the mission medical. Just a really robust system that's out there. A lot of people back in Salt Lake on the back end that are making it work. And if a missionary gets really sick and they need to be evacuated, they're on top of that. They're right there to provide all the services that they need to get the missionary out of the mission. So
yeah. Yeah, that's great. So what's next for you? You've been home about 6 months now. Have you kind of found your next direction, or?
So I am not going back to be a doctor. I've decided to retire, so no more medicine for me. I play a lot of pickleball, so I'm playing pickleball just about every day, except for Sundays. And I also am now teaching sailing. So we've had a sailboat for about 15 years, and I have my Coast Guard captain's license, and I've just finished some certification to teach sailing for people who want to go out and charter a boat. There's a certain level of certification that they need. There's 3 different classes, about a week long's worth of classes that they need to do to certify that they're good enough to rent a 40-foot sailboat on their own. So I do that training and that instruction. I'm just starting that, so that's exciting.
Oh, wow, that's great. Get you on the water more and more, and it's probably good for your heart, right?
Yes, very good for my heart.
That's awesome. Now, I want to ask you about, you also have become a little bit of a podcaster yourself in your ward. Is that right?
That's right. You inspired me to be a podcaster. So
Oh, cool.
I served as bishop in this Anacortes Ward from 2016 until 2021. And after I got released, one of the things that kind of just struck me was that we just don't know each other very well. And we go to church on Sundays and we say hi and we shake hands and we spend 2 hours together, but we just really don't know each other very well on a general level. There are people who work, in callings. I think for example, the young men's leaders that spend a week on a camp out, they get to know each other pretty well. But other than that, we don't. And so you had a podcast about why your ward needs a podcast. And I think your angle was more on a family history, getting people starting on their family history. And that's kind of our angle also, but we also want it to be so people can get to know each other. So before we left on our mission, we started interviewing people in our ward and just had them tell their life story. And we have them start from the beginning where they were born and their family growing up, and kind of concentrate on their early years and their faith development over the years before we all knew them. Okay. And these turn out to be like over an hour long, lots of times, an hour and 20 minutes. So it's a long thing. I mean, we would publish them about once a month. We stockpiled about 15 before we left on our mission. So we just released once a month until we ran out. And then we ran out in the middle of our mission. Kristine and I interviewed ourselves, and so we had two more to put on the altar there. And then when we got back, there was a lot of interest still, so we started doing it again, and we've been doing it since January. We're now having so many people interviewed that we're doing it twice a month, so we've kind of stepped it up. And it gets, about 40 or 50 listens on each podcast. It's just meant for our ward, so it's not supposed to go out to the millions of people in the world. But I really think that it has been helpful in having people get to know each other. In fact, we interviewed somebody just the other day, and one of her comments was, she says, "Oh, I'm so glad I listened to so-and-so's interview because now I understand them better." I said, yes, that's our whole point of what we wanted to do, is to help you understand people better. And so I think we're at least I feel like we're making some progress there.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. I love hearing, I get hear from people all over the world, really, or in the Leading Saints audience that have started these ward podcasts. And it just, I love it because I'm doing that currently in my ward. And yeah, just when you hear somebody's story, just where they come from, their background, what they did for work or their faith development, it's amazing what you can you become endeared towards them. You want just love them that much more. So we'll link to that episode, and I need to update it because I think I found some other tips and tricks that maybe will make it easier on people, but they don't have experience starting a podcast, but want to. But you'd say, once you figure it out, it's pretty slick, right?
Yeah, it was pretty easy. Your podcast was so good about telling how to do it. You introduced me to Audacity, Spotify for podcasters, and it was pretty easy once I got going. And I even have theme music. I got permission from the musician to use their music, and I even have an outro with Sister Beck talking about Zion, and so that's pretty
Oh,
cool.
cool. Yeah, I love that. Love that. Any other nuances that you've discovered just in the journey that might be helpful?
Probably the best thing about the podcast is my wife and I just love sitting down with people and listening to them. It has been one of the highlights of our week, is that when that comes up, we get to hear people, even though we might have known them for 15, 20 years, we are finding out things that we just never knew before. And it's been just so delightful. It's been really a highlight. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that's happening, and we'll link to that episode if anybody else wants to jump in. To me, it's such an easy calling, and it's so enjoyable for everybody involved. The ward loves it. So yeah, I definitely endorse that for sure. Well, last question I have for you: as you reflect on your time as a missionary, as a church leader, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
I think that you have an appreciation for those who sit in that chair with that responsibility. So I think that I am much more patient with those who are leading. It's easier for me to extend them grace and to be understanding of what they're going through, and to be more than willing to support them in their callings.